So we have legal things to discuss. We called our lawyer. We do not have him on retainer because we're cheap and broken. And Dan, unfortunately, gives us his services for free in these instances. Hi, buddy.
Good to see you guys. And I don't know if it's free, but I'll hit you with a bill one day when you least expect it.
Oh, my God. That's scary.
There are several invoices in my inbox that I just send to the spam folder, Dan. I'm going to be honest.
Wait, you've been lying to me this entire time? This is what Lucas is going to do. He's just been hoarding these invoices. He's going to give them to me. And then I'm going to have to pay for Dan's services. This makes sense. Dan,
you got to read the fine print. Always, Buck. You got to read the fine print.
How am I supposed to do that without legal consultation from my lawyer here? This is scary. This is like this bar here locally. It's called Mother's Ruin. I feel like every time we go in there, they give you free shots. And every once in a while you walk out of there and you'll open a tab, they won't charge you, right? You'll walk out of there having had 12 drinks and you're paying $40. And then other times you'll get hit with a $500 bill because they've been putting somebody else's tab on your tab. That's what I feel like is about to happen to me with Dan.
You're good. You're good. Don't worry about it. I'm just messing with you, Buck. Don't get nightmares. We're good. You're off the hook.
I gotta call my agent. I gotta take some money out of the stock market. I gotta do something to pay for Dan Lust anyway. Dan is here because Tennessee, not the university, the state, along with Virginia, their attorneys general have filed suit against the NCAA, indicating that the NCAA's name, image, and likeness rules are basically unfair to what it is that they had previously outlined, that they're moving the goalposts, and that Tennessee and Virginia are banding together to try and get this thing corrected. Dan, what was your first reaction when you saw not just that the NCAA was going to investigate Tennessee, but the attorneys general of these two respective states were joining together to file this suit?
I guess it started probably yesterday when you saw the comments from Tennessee, and I guess some of the leaking of this report that Tennessee was focused, I don't want to say on punishing, but focusing their efforts on investigating someone that wasn't employed by Tennessee, but that had some, I guess we'll call some relationship with the school that seems to be indicative of the collective landscape. So, yeah, you're going after people associated with the collective who are generally donors to the school. You have the school itself speaking out. And then maybe within the last month, we had all these attorney generals band together in West Virginia to fight the transfer case. You have the Department of Justice weighing in. So it doesn't surprise me, right, that the attorney generals have put their stamp on this. It is a little shocking, and maybe for the best, within 24 hours of the investigation being kind of out there publicly, this lawsuit's filed. That's a pretty big statement. That's basically saying the entire state is banding together to fight this injustice. So for those living in the state, I think that's a tremendous sign. It hasn't happened yet in any of these college or NIL lawsuits around the country. The speed at which the Attorney General mobilized is certainly very impressive.
At Sports Law Lust is where you can follow Dan Lust. You can check out his podcast. It's called Conduct Detrimental. Wherever you get your podcasts, it's incredibly insightful and helps you understand all of the different legal situations that arise in the world of sports, including this one. I'm sure that Dan is going to cover what's happening with the University of Tennessee and the NCAA. So since this is the first of its kind that we've seen from a state filing suit against this institution, was it only a matter of time before this happened, Dan, given the way that the NCAA has just, I don't want to say that they've allowed it to be the Wild Wild West for the last 2.5 years, but it's just been so murky as to what the actual rules are and how they were going to govern this was always beyond me, given that it differs from state to state.
Well, the three of us probably spoke about this about a year ago. There was some memo or some memorandum that came out from the NCAA that said if there's a conflict between state law and the NCAA's rules, that the NCAA expected that the NCAA's rules would be enforced over state law. So you had lawyers like myself run onto Twitter and social media and say, that's not going to hold up in court. The rules of a private association generally do not win when they go up against the state law. So, that's why in maybe the last year or so, you've had this big push by the NCAA and some conferences, some ADs, to get a federal law on the books to basically clean up this state law landscape to make it uniform across the country. But in the absence of a federal law, more often than not, state law is going to take precedent. So it was just really a matter of time. You've had some, athletic directors say we're going to abide by the state law. You have some athletic directors being quiet and not taking the position out loud. But when you have a big school like a Tennessee, Florida's also being investigated. Florida State was just punished. It just takes one to say, listen, what we did is legal under our state law, so we'll take you to court over it. So it's been sitting there for a while for someone to take. And, it's not going to shock anybody that a big school like Tennessee in SEC country is the first one to take it.
So with that, given that there have been adjustments to the way that the NCAA governs this stuff, Dan, Tom Mars, the attorney on behalf of the Spire Sports Group, which is the name, image, and likeness collective that is associated with the University of Tennessee, now a partner to some extent, is documenting in his statement on behalf of Spire Sports the timeline of how it was that their relationship, their contractual relationship with Nico came to be, and how it was done in accordance at the time with the laws of the state of California, of which Nico is from. What is the grounds that the NCAA has to stand on if everybody around them is saying, no, you can't go back and retroactively enforce things after you've already adjusted the rules? What are we missing here on behalf of the NCAA's case?
Full disclosure, Tom's been on my show before. I know Tom pretty well. I think you've hit on something, and it's a very good question. The NCAA basically had their first, and this is not sugarcoating, about a year after the July 1st, 2021 era of NIL started. That's when the first state laws allowed it, where the NCAA allowed it. They basically went a year without punishing anybody. And then, they went another year with basically just punishing Miami women's basketball. And then these past 3 weeks, we had the Florida State punishment and the 2 investigations into Florida and Tennessee. So, it really hasn't been any enforcement. So if you're sitting here, and I always try to give you guys a big lawyer word as we're, I come on with you guys every so on. I got to give you some legal education. There's a concept in the law called acquiescence. Right? So quick on the trigger.
Now, damn it, Lucas, he's trying to explain the terminology. He's trying to inform and educate us, and immediately you drown him out with your law and order.
Now you're the one interrupting him. Stop talking. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry about that.
God, I hate you.
It's all good. Guys, acquiescence is an important concept. Essentially, it says that if the NCAA allowed some type of conduct to happen and they let it go for a year or 2 years and they didn't punish anybody, maybe they're just acquiescing to this conduct, right? We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know if the NCAA sent a letter to any of these schools, but it's kind of fair for Tennessee, Florida, any of these schools to rely on the NCAA and saying, yeah, they're not going to punish anyone for this. For now, right, we're in 2024. For them to go back and to try to punish Tennessee for acts that occurred in 2021, I mean, the optics are horrendous. And I think that's part of this crowd. It's maybe the legal, kind of non-legal crowd. How are we retroactively doing this? Yeah, I guess technically it might have been illegal what was on the NCAA's books, but you weren't punishing anybody. Mark Emmert was leaving office. You were switching to the Charlie Baker era, and that was a year ago. So for 3 years you didn't do anything, and now you want to punish us? I do think it leaves a sour taste, and I do think it kind of is this concept, again, of like kind of arbitrary enforcement. Why now? Why are you picking Tennessee? And I've always thought that this challenge was ripe for someone to make against the NCAA, that these rules conflict with state law. So why are we allowing the NCAA to control the landscape? I'm not surprised that it's Tennessee, but I am surprised it took this long.
And Don D. Plowman, the chancellor at Tennessee, is the human embodiment right now of bleep around and find out. Dan Lust is here with us on 104.5 The Zone. At Sports Law Lust is where you can follow our friend, the sports attorney.
So, Dan, we continue to talk about this as though it's a total slam dunk in favor of Tennessee and Virginia and the University of Tennessee, and there's probably some inherent bias in that for a lot of people, including myself, quite honestly, that would love to see the NCAA go down and are sick of the contradictory and inconsistent rhetoric coming from that organization over the years. But let's flip it around. Do you see a flaw in Tennessee and Virginia's argument?
I don't know if it's a flaw. I guess it's just people need to get their kind of expectations together, right? I mean, it's a motion for declaratory judgment, which if you waited till the case got to trial or some type of decision would take a year, more than a year. That in this interim relief, which maybe is being a little bit underreported, is that they're looking for a temporary restraining order. They're looking for an injunction. They're basically looking for right now that the NCAA's NIL rules will no longer be applicable. So if there's a flaw, it's that the filing of this lawsuit doesn't do anything. You have to have a judge rule on it, and you have to have a judge rule that there's going to be some immediate harm in which, that has to be rectified now to stop the NCAA's enforcement. So we started this conversation. with this concept of like the Tennessee is under investigation. There's no punishment right now. There's no time frame for the NCAA's punishment of Tennessee or Florida or really any other school that we're aware of. So I'm not aware of some immediate harm that will, tangibly result to Tennessee. Sure, we could say they might be scared to conduct certain activities, but you have to show a likelihood of harm in some immediate time frame to get this immediate relief, which, if anything, I think that's a weakness, but it's not that it can't be rectified later on, but the timing doesn't quite add up. Announced to be under investigation, okay, when you guys are punished or about to be punished, maybe it's a little bit more right.
At Sports Law Lust is where you can follow Dan Lust. Conduct Detrimental is the podcast. He's going to be covering this alongside all the other stories that they cover in the legal world of sports. Dan, what can people expect? What can Vols fans expect when they seek out the podcast to dive into a little more detail than we've been able to cover here?
I guess, and we actually covered it last night. I knew this lawsuit was going to be filed. I didn't know it was going to be the next day, or else I probably would have saved the podcast for tonight. But we recorded last night. I mean, there is an analogous situation going on in Florida right now. There's the Nico situation. There's the Jaden Rashada situation. What we've seen, at least in the NCAA's willingness to go after schools, they go after these high-profile incidents. So, Tennessee and Florida probably have the two high-profile signings, be it an $8 million signing or alleged signing for Tennessee, and Florida with a $13 million deal gone wrong for Jaden Rashada. So we covered both of those. We covered really how these two incidents and the collectives, how that fits into the larger landscape. So not a Tennessee podcast, but a very heavy Tennessee episode.
Well worth your time. Conduct Detrimental, Dan Lust, the show's attorney, even if we're not paying him the way that we should be paying him. Thank you, Dan. It's always good to talk to you, buddy.
See you guys anytime.
That's the appropriate time for the gavel.
Act like I have any control over what comes out of this computer.
Well, that is entirely believable based on how this show runs. It's like Boris Johnson. He's never there when I need him. Only when
the brakes.
Damn it.
So what do you take away from that? Because when I hear Dan, I asked it because I want to know the biggest flaw in Tennessee's argument, right? Because
Sure.
We're all acting like slam dunk. This is the end of the NCAA. It's a little more complicated than that. But if the biggest flaw for Dan at surface level is they may not get that temporary restraining order, that feels like things are looking pretty good for Tennessee and pretty bad for the NCAA.
Well, my biggest question resulting out of that is, can this be an actual death blow for the NCAA? Like, is what is being adjudicated in this case enough to truly change NCAA policy outright, if not affect the institution? NCAA policy on name, image, and likeness has never been more fluid, which is Tennessee's whole argument. So I don't know if it's just going to force the NCAA's hand to make sure, all right, you're putting this in stone. These are the rules that we're going to govern NIL with under your jurisdiction, okay? Not under states' jurisdictions, but these are what your responsibilities are, NCAA, within the scope of governance of name, image, and likeness. This is what you get. We know this. We all understand this moving forward. These are the rules of engagement. You can't walk this stuff back. You can't try and change the game as we move forward. This is your thing. This is the state's thing. This is for the collectives. This is for the institutions. And how all these things mix and mingle, at least we have clearly defined lines. If it accomplishes nothing more than that, then it's a win. Because the NCAA, the lack of clarity here is why people are tripping and falling all over themselves trying to make sure that they're doing things within the context of the appropriate rules. Tennessee doesn't want to have to pay for lawyers, doesn't want to have to, put together these scorched earth statements that Donde Plowman is producing. They don't want to have the discussion be about lawsuits that they're fighting as opposed to their 5-star quarterback who they just want to get out on the field and sell tickets and sell merch and sell stuff for Nico in his name, image, and likeness and all these different elements. I always like having Dan on. Thank God for smart people. 615-737-1045. Last call for phone calls. We'll update the polls. That's next.